Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Sharing Hope. I'm your host today, Michael DiMuccio with Medi-Share, and today we have another special guest, Sami Cone. She is a TV host, speaker, well-known blogger, and best-selling author. She's highly known for empowering women with finances and encouragement. She's the founder of SamiCone.com. Sami, welcome today.
I want to get to know that girl. Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate you having me here. Thank you.
No, it's our pleasure to have you. And looking at your materials and things, I just find such a unique journey that God has brought you through, and He's using all those things to really touch lives and specifically empowering women in a great way. But speaking of just life in general, here we are in this new norm. Hopefully it'll end soon, but how have you been adjusting to all this?
I'll be honest, you say all those things about me. I'm a busy gal. I don't sit down very often, and yet I have so enjoyed this slower pace. I will be honest. I think those of us that are classic overachievers or high functioning, we like to be out and about, but I have really enjoyed spending more time with my family. I have enjoyed the lack of expectations that have come in this new normal with everyone just figuring out what works. I've been cooking more with my teenage son. He's been beating me in basketball a lot more, but just, finding new ways to communicate and check in on people and rediscovering some things I think about myself and even my family that I haven't really had time to reflect on until this. So thank you for asking. How are you doing?
Well, we've been certainly adjusting well and marching. A lot of what I do with Medi-Share is events, and all those changed to virtual, as you would imagine. Yeah. Adjusting and on the fly, like everybody. And so learning the new norms, learning to cope and to really thrive with this. Tell us a little bit about now. I know a lot of viewers, they've seen, you before, maybe they've been told about you. And so they came to this site. You've got this background. Talk about how you started and how people began to get to know you, in that realm of receiving, frugal tips.
It's an interesting story. I've always been a frugal girl. I grew up basically with the mantra, if I wanted something, I had to win it or save for it. It was just the way that it was. My father was born during the Great Depression, first generation American, Jewish American. My mom was from England. I was an only child. My parents got divorced when I was 7. So just money was tight. And I just learned not to ask for a lot and just kind of find my way. And I never knew any different, honestly. I'm one of those people that on Black Friday, if someone's giving away, a TV to the first 100 people, I think I'm surely the only one that knows about this. I'll just show up and be the only one there. And of course, that's not the case. And so I just have this unique way of viewing things. And I've always just really studied frugality, both from practice and then as I've gotten older out of necessity, but also trying to eliminate, as I've become a Christian, a fear of money. I grew up with a real fear of not having enough. And so I held onto things really tightly. It was a really unhealthy way of being frugal. Whereas frugal doesn't mean cheap. It means making the most of what you have and maximizing what you have. And that's the abundant life that God calls us to, that I really embraced when I came to know Christ in my 20s. And so after that, I didn't realize that not everyone knew what I knew. They didn't know how to do Disney on the cheap, or they didn't know when to go get a free bagel at Panera or a free Chick-fil-A sandwich. And so that's really where my blogging started. Over a decade ago is when we moved from Florida to Nashville. One of the first things my friend said, besides I'll miss you, is how are we going to know when to get all our freebies and our deals and everything? So truthfully, that's how the blog was born, was just to keep my friends in the know, because I thought I'm not going to call you all the time. And it's really grown from that. So everything from saving money on travel, daily necessities, but really not just the what and where, but the how to rethink why we spend what we spend, or how can we be better about, being a good steward of what we have and being generous with what we have.
Sure. I've heard it once said by a financial counselor type is, it's you telling your money what to do.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily be afraid of a budget.
Right.
But all the things that you share, goes right into the heartbeat of that. Do you have any particular anecdotes of, kind of a champion moment where you're like, I got this really down now? Is there any moment that speaks to you on that level?
It's funny. I haven't thought of this in a while, but kind of on both sides of what I realized I was becoming and didn't want to be. And then, the flip side of that was I remember once after we moved to Nashville, and again, we moved here, my husband's job was taken away from him. We were here with what we thought was going to be a better situation for our family. It turned out to be worse in the beginning. And I remember Sunday night, it was like 8:59 and CVS was closing at 9. And I was trying to run out the door. And my husband was like, grabbing me like, where are you going? I'm like, there's free gum at CVS. I got to get it. And he was like, you're insane. Like, we don't need every free thing there is. And I did. I had to take a step back and be like, who am I becoming? What is going on? On the flip side of that is, not just throwing away everything. Some people say, well, I don't coupon because I don't eat boxed XYZ, right? Well, there's more than that. If you look at all of the resources available to you. And I remember the first time I really kind of clicked on couponing, for example, since we're keeping in the drugstore, grocery store example. And I was at the checkout and I had saved more than I spent on my weekly grocery trip. And the man in the line behind me looks at me and says, wow, those savings are impressive. I just was like, well, thank you. And so it really is just a matter of finding what works for you. Anyone can embrace aspects of it. It's just like if you're trying to lose weight. If you say, I'm going to give up chocolate and dairy and gluten and, all these things, you might be able to do that for a little bit, but long term, if you haven't examined why you're doing it, it's not going to be sustainable. And so I think if you look and say, I want my family to eat healthier on a budget, or just we like what we're doing, we just would rather travel more than eating out at home. It's kind of like you were saying, you have to tell your money what you want it to do and then communicate that plan. Sometimes we're good as the homemakers or as the head of the household, whatever the case may be, we know what we're doing, but we don't communicate that plan. And if you're not talking and communicating as a family, so they see the end goal, especially if there's sacrifices involved, then it's not going to last as long as you want it to. But when you're really clear, both with yourself and whoever is in your household, it makes it a lot easier.
Very good. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And especially in a time like this, obviously we're all pressed, financially and looking for provisions and things that will work in place of something that was once so accessible.
Right.
Let's have a little heart to heart here. No pun intended. What has been, the heartbeat of your message to moms, especially in this current crisis? I know you speak a lot about compassion and things in those principles. In a book you have, Raising Uncommon Kids. How do you tie that together with this situation going on now?
Sure. I'm glad you brought that up. My heartbeat behind that book was not so much because I feel like I'm an expert in compassion, but really the opposite. When it came to my parenting, I felt like I was maybe raising selfish kids instead of selfless kids. But then I also realized I had to put the mirror on myself, right? Where do our kids learn from, right? We reflect who we look at. And so it was really an eye-opening moment for me to realize, how do I view compassion? How do I view generosity? And sometimes we set these really lofty goals for ourselves and our kids without starting with the basics. And so in Raising Uncommon Kids, it's really I say it's a Christian 12-step approach to parenting taken from Colossians 3 verses 12 through 17, because there's so many good characteristics packed into those verses. And it starts with loving God and understanding the love God has for us, respecting your parents and those around you, leaning on the wisdom of those that are more experienced, and so on and so forth. And then we can understand what compassion is when it's wrapped up into all this. But I think in these days in particular, Michael, when there's so many unknowns, so much newness, so much out of the norm, we really need to learn to be not only more compassionate towards others, but towards ourselves and those in the four walls that we're living in, right? The people that we love the most are sometimes the ones that we have the least amount of grace and the least amount of compassion for. So I think first taking stock and just taking a deep breath, everyone watching can take a deep breath with us and just ask, what is it that I need? I mean, that's a hard question to ask. If we were really honest, we've been doing this in our Sunday school class virtually every week. And it's the last question we ask, what do you need right now? And I'll be honest, I cry every time that question is asked of me. And I don't really know why. But I think sometimes we're ashamed to even ask that question when God asks it of us. What do you want? What can we not only do for him, but he wants to know us better. And so I think if we can be a little more honest with ourselves and say, okay, how can I love myself through the eyes of God today? What do I need? And then have the bravery to ask those that we live with, especially if we haven't been very compassionate towards them, and even our kids, and say, you know what, I'm sorry. I've been short. I've been stressed. I've been whatever those things are. How can I love you better today? What do you need from me today? What would make a difference in this moment? And, I remember I would sometimes do these grandiose things for my kids and realize that wasn't what they wanted at all. It really made me feel better by doing that. They just wanted to play a board game, or they just wanted me to take them driving, in the parking lot, or they just wanted me to watch them play a video game. And I'm thinking, shoot me now. Are you kidding? Like, that's the last thing I want to do. And how does that mean anything? But it's what they wanted. And so I think it's important that even though we are going slower, sometimes I find we're just filling our time or just getting through the day because it's another day that ends in Y and we don't know what that day is, instead of being intentional about this time. Because like you said, this too shall pass. This will be over. And what do we want to show for it at the end of it?
Right. It's so important, and can be such times of building relationships and real building blocks, as you're alluding, like into the future. And I think that's so key, loving people on their terms. Hey, all we want is a board game.
Right. And it is I don't know if you're finding this. I have teenagers in my house, and it was the funniest moment the other day. She's like, Mom, do we have stamps? And I was like, do you know what those are? It was like this weird, almost like, what are these things called stamps? She goes, I want to write letters to my friends. And it was, it was like she had thought of this revolutionary idea. I was like, yes, that's how we used to communicate before there was email and before there was Snapchat and all of these things. And it's been so joyful for me to see these teenagers kind of going back to the practices that used to be normal for us, and just rediscovering the joy. And of course, they're still online and they're still doing those things, but it's been fun to just see these things. We pulled out a box of cassette tapes the other day, and I was like, these are mixtapes. This is what we used to play when we couldn't just pull up our favorite song and we didn't know what the lyrics were. We'd have to listen to it over and over again to figure out. So those moments that are not scripted, and I wouldn't wake up in the morning saying, today I am going to teach my children the art of letter writing. But if you pay attention, and this is where the slowing down and the intentionality comes in, if you pay attention to those moments, or if your kids are repeating something over and over again, or your spouse, that should be a cue to say, oh, okay, just because I don't think that's a big deal, or I take that for granted, doesn't mean I shouldn't validate them in what they're, verbally or non-verbally telling me this is something that I need right now.
Right. Very good. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit. A lot of, your television show deals or speaks to women who kind of want to be in the know, but they know what they don't know, kind of thing. Right. And, you kind of encourage them, or you do encourage them to lean into strengths, lean into community. Talk a little bit about that experience on the show, and is the show going on right now while you're in lockdown mode, so to speak?
Believe it or not, the show is still going on, kind of much like what we're doing here. We're doing a lot of Zoom interviews. I've got my son working as a cameraman for in-house shots. We just filmed a segment in my garage about how to sell stuff online, which you can find at samicone.com if you want those tips. So we're just getting creative with the show, but it was, I've been on TV again for over a decade here in Nashville, and it got to the point where people, I think, resonated with the message that I was sharing of, you don't have to know how to do everything. But that doesn't mean we don't have a desire to be better, right? We want to grow our strengths, and we also want to learn how to improve our weaknesses. So for instance, I would do cooking segments on our local TV show. I wouldn't call myself a great cook, but I also don't just write it off and be like, well, I'm not a great cook, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm always learning. So I help people. It might be meal prep. It might be how to save money on, making multiple meals at once. So I'm always learning. And that's really what my show has become, is me pointing people to other women about things. Really, it's selfish for me because I want to know more about these things. I want to know more about what makes people tick, how they were able to do what they did. I may not want to become a painter, for instance, but I find that I can learn a lot from someone by learning about their process of how they got to be where they are, or what books they read, or what people they encountered. And I think when we share our stories that way, it makes us think about why we're doing what we're doing. And it can, instead of comparing ourselves and saying, oh, why am I not as good as they are? I hope that it encourages women, and just like I hope it encourages everyone watching today, again, to take stock and think, what am I good at? Or what have I not done in a while? Not so much. Sometimes we lose our identity, especially as moms and as parents, that we become what we want our kids to become, instead of saying, I used to love playing tennis. I used to be a tennis pro, in fact. It would be great for me to pick up the racket again, not so that I can become a tennis professional in my 40s, but so that I can show my kids why I love the game so much and why I chose this for my career. Again, not to win Wimbledon, but I wanted to find a way to travel and not pay for it. And so, again, that's another way of being frugal. I'm like, I don't need to be the best in the world, but I want to be good enough where I can get a job that will allow me to travel the world as a tennis player. And that's what I did for 2 years. So those are the types of things. I think sometimes we get so linear and thinking I have to do this from 9 to 5, and I can do this once my kids leave for college, so on and so forth. And this is such a great time to pick up the things that you haven't thought of in a while, or just even sit around the dinner table and ask the question, what would you do right now if you could do anything, go anywhere, and just see what that sparks in you, see what, rises up in your heart, and how can you pursue that? Because if that makes you better, that's going to make your family and your friends better.
Wow, all of which you're saying, in terms of the way you're thinking and approaching life is, I might not go to Wimbledon, but I do love this game of tennis. That it's reminding me of, or at least I'm making the connection. A blog you got a lot of traction on recently. 70 things for teens to do while stuck at home. But I think this kind of thinking leaned into that, or I would suspect it did. So I'd love for you to take some time, talk about, the surprise of how much traction that blog got, and start unpacking that a little bit. I mean, you don't have to do all 70, but
sure. Well, I think it was surprising to me, especially, not to get too technical, but in the blogging arena, usually things that have longevity are the things that do the best. So for this to quickly become my number one post after 12 years of posts really told me this is striking a chord. And I think, one, because sometimes when we get to having teenagers, we kind of figure they're on autopilot, right? They can wake up, they can feed themselves, they can exist in the day without us. And so you don't see as many Pinterest boards and videos of crafts and things that you do with people that have littles. And so I think that was one thing. But the other was, I'm hoping that people are stepping back and saying, I just don't want to make sure my kids are alive, right? I mean, I know sometimes when my kids were babies, I'm like, my only goal is to make sure they're breathing, make sure we get through the day. I think we're all realizing, wow, we're in, as of the record, we've been self-quarantined for 5 weeks. What can we do so that we come out on the other side of this, not just in survival mode, but to say, we killed it. We were able to really turn something that looked bad or looked like an obstacle into an opportunity. So I thought through 10 categories of activities for teens to do, and really it can be for anyone, while stuck at home. And some were insanely practical, like here are some great sites for online and virtual learning. Here are ways to learn how to code. Here's some ways to make money. So if your child is saying, well, I really want something, right? They're online, they want to shop, they want V-Bucks, they want whatever they want. Great. We'll find a way to turn some of your projects into a way to earn cash. Why don't you learn how to write an ebook? Why don't you start your own Etsy shop? Here's how to code and make your own website. Here's how to, do YouTube. So there's some of those things. And then I've also looked at just like we were talking about, getting back to basics, planting a garden, right? Food is hard to come by these days. So let's look at some of the things we're eating, and we can take those seeds and literally plant them outside and regrow things. So it's really ranging on the gamut from entrepreneurial to educational, things to help others. That's, I know, for at least for us, a way that we feel a little helpless, and talking about compassion of how can we help others when we feel helpless, when our jobs are now gone, or when we don't have school and friends to go to, but just really trying to flip the script and think, okay, nothing is new under the sun. God is still in control. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. How can we help them to begin to look at things differently for themselves? Because I know, especially for my kids, I don't get to be that in their lives in a couple of years when they're in college. So we go through all of those things from, coloring sheets to help you reduce stress to, like I said, some of those real tactile, practical. My son literally built himself a personal pool outside last week because he said, "Can we get a pool?" I'm like, no. He's like, "Can I build one, dig one?" I'm like, "Sure," not thinking he was actually going to do it. And yet he's got his own little square personal pool in the dirt, which I don't know if it will last very long. But I just think those are the memories that we will, when we think about this a year from now, 10 years from now, we'll say, "Remember when you went out and built a pool in the backyard?" And those are the things that I think our kids at least need to experience. So again, we don't always jump right to the end goal, just like if you're a runner, if you're a writer, whatever it is. But what does the process look like, and how does that train you in becoming who you're meant to be as you go through that journey?
Sure. That's really good. That's I was already, while you were answering the question about the blog, and you're talking about all of a sudden your son's digging a pool in the backyard. I was going to ask, what have been some of the favorites from that list, maybe that your kids really appreciated mom directing them or encouraging them to do?
Yeah, I think, like I said, that has been some of those really, I don't want to say basic. I think the things that are hard for me, and maybe for all of us, are the things that are not in our natural self. I mentioned, him asking, he's like, "Will you just sit in here with me while I play a video game?" And to me, I don't even understand video games. I've never played one of those, Best Fiends or Fruit, I don't know, all of those, games on your phone. That's just not my thing. But then at the same time, my kids can walk in here and see me on the computer and on my blog and think, "I don't know what that is. That doesn't make sense." But that doesn't mean I don't want them to ask me questions about it or take interest in what I do, because that's part of who I am. And so with my kids, sometimes I literally feel like, and it's not a sit down, grab them by the shoulder, stare them in the face and say, "We're going to find something for you to do and you're going to like it," right? That doesn't happen a lot. So sometimes it's just, the casual, just continuing to drip and drop things out there. With my daughter, I know she's artistic, but she hasn't done a lot with that lately. And I had said a couple things, and I said, "What about painting outside? It's been so nice out." And she said, "Oh, that'd be great." Okay. So then and knowing that once you do that, okay, I think we've got some art supplies in the basement still. And we had a couple canvases that we had gotten from some project and some old watercolors from grade school. Like, this doesn't mean go to the store and, buy out the whole section. If they say, "I want to learn guitar," you don't have to go buy it. Ask a friend and say, "Hey, do you have a guitar you're not using right now that we could borrow for a little bit?" The other thing that surprised me, besides the personal pool in the backyard, is that my son has developed this love for cooking. And you wouldn't normally think 14-year-old boy cooking videos, but he found this guy on TikTok, which I don't know if you're familiar. It's one of the newer social media channels where people are obsessed with doing all these dances. He found a chef on TikTok, and we've made shrimp scampi, we've made chicken marsala, we've made chicken katsu, which is like a Japanese fried chicken, homemade tortillas. And so that was all driven by him. And so again, sometimes it's not, we don't want to say all things are bad. If I was to say, "You're not going to be allowed on your screen at all during this time," he would never have discovered that thing that actually took him off of the screen and has provided so much joy every night. Well, he doesn't like to do the dishes. That's the only thing I haven't been able to teach. But I think, so doing some of those art type projects, and again, not just to create, it's not so much about what you create, but it's the process and the conversations that happen as a result of that. Cooking with my son has been great, but it's not just we're making food. It's he's getting to, share shoulder to shoulder time with me. I'm getting to learn more about him. And those are the things that I think have been really sweet.
Good. That's good. And kind of as you've alluded, in a few years, these types of memories won't be made anymore, kind of thing.
Right.
Well, new memories, like the college years
Sure.
kind of thing, and going into adulthood. That's excellent. But I want to kind of springboard off of that into this concept you speak of. I believe it's in your podcast, fearless, being courageous. Talk, we've talked about your blogs a little bit. We touched on your TV show, but you have a passion to your voice. You obviously have a zeal to empower people. So talk about your podcast a little bit. What kind of content is there in this chord that you're striking? Being fearless. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's a project that's been on my heart for over a decade. And if I'm being real honest, I have pushed it aside because I was afraid of doing something wrong, of not doing it the right way, not having the right equipment, not, all the knots, right? That's what comes into our head. And as I was quiet myself, I try to do what I teach. And as I was quiet in this time of self-quarantine, it was the one thing that pushed through the rest of the noise was you have to do this project. And it's called Generation Wisdom. It's brand new. It's out, finally out right now. And it's a series of conversations that I have with women that are dear to me, but from all different walks of life. I'm talking to singers and authors and speakers and moms and entrepreneurs. But the amount of time they get in the podcast is determined by their age. So the 20-year-old gets 20 minutes, 30-year-old gets 30 minutes, so on and so forth, up to 60. And the idea behind being fearless, and this is something that's been on my heart for so long, but it's so appropriate to this time, is that I think we are all afraid, right? The Bible doesn't say that we're not afraid, right? It says, do not be afraid. Perfect love casts out fear. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist within us. It's what are we doing with it? What can we do instead of submitting and surrendering to this fear? How can we say, gosh, I'm anxious, I'm fearful. It has a lot of different words, right? We can call it any number of things. So how do we flip it? I teach public speaking. And one of the things that I try to teach my students right off the bat is this concept of positive nervousness. And you'll see stars from Jay-Z to Adele that say they still throw up before performances. They're so nervous, but it's what you do with that. And so the idea is not to say it's not there. It's not like I've got it all figured out, I'm never afraid, but to say, I care so much that this matters to me. And I'm feeling it on a physical level. I'm feeling it on an emotional level. And I'm going to transform that into a positive energy. And so with these conversations, it's been such a blessing to hear these women that have, by all stretch of the imagination, achieved some really incredible things, whether it's being published or, like I said, having an album, having successful businesses, and to see how they've been able to step into their calling, even when it was hard, even when it was scary. And I think, like I said, even in this time now, I could have said, Lord, I don't want to do that. I've got a TV show. I've got kids. I've got this. I'm not going to do that. And, I finally just said, look, I'm putting it out there. Is it professionally mixed? Did I get a graphic artist? No, I'm just putting it out there because I know that just like this interview right now, people aren't going to remember everything I said, but I hope that something I said triggered something in them. And it may not even have been words that came out of my mouth, but it's something that God can do when we're obedient in speaking our truth and just being a conduit for what he says. And this, I'll be quick, but I think I want to say my mentor always taught me that God did not create us to be like the Dead Sea. He created us to be like the Red Sea. If something flows into us, it needs to flow out of us. It's not for us to keep. And so there's something inside of you, whoever is listening right now, there is something I pray that has come to mind during this time that you cannot push down anymore, that you cannot ignore. And you may not do it perfectly, and you may not even know how, but chances are you can start and you can find someone who does. And that's what I want to encourage everyone to do, is not to be stalled by fear, but to step out in faith and see what God can do when you just open up your hands and allow him to work in and through you.
So good and refreshing. And I have to say something here. You said something that I really believe is prophetic to the church now. A colleague of mine just said in a chapel at Medi-Share, he said, the reason God says, do not fear is because he knows there will be those
Yes.
or those times that you will be struck with fear type of thing. And so that's really good. And everything you put in that thrust is really ministering to me just sitting here listening. You're right. There will be nuggets that people grab onto. But, with that, how can people, as we kind of land the plane here of the interview, why don't you tell folks, where they can go? We've talked about TV shows, blogs, this, that, newsletters, all the things you're doing. What would be the best place to direct them to?
You're kind. I think the easiest place is to go to samicone.com. That's SAMICONE.com. And there you can find links for the Sami Cone Show, which is here in Nashville, but can be watched online all over the world. Generation Wisdom is wherever podcasts are. I'm the Sami Cone on Twitter and Instagram. But I think if you go to samicone.com, it's where you will find me. And I know it sounds like a lot, but it's only because I'm true to myself, and that's where it was. I've never pigeonholed myself because that's not who I am. And so I try a lot of things. Some things work, some things don't. But I think when we're true to ourselves, we can live a fuller, authentic life.
Excellent. Sami, thank you for sharing today on Sharing Hope. And that's what it's all about for our viewers. Of course, we want to thank you for joining us, and we encourage you to check out more of Sami's material. Obviously, she's got a lot of resourcing to help and equip you, especially in this time. And she's been doing this a long time. So even when this is over, Sami, you're
still be there. You can't get rid of me.
Plugging away, staying strong.
That's right.
And we appreciate you being here on Sharing Hope.
Oh, thank you.
And God bless you.
God bless you in this ministry. Thank you so much, Michael.